Thailand. Udon Thani. 1967, it is 4 in the morning.
A C-130 pilot receives an order he does not understand. His cargo is not bombs.
It is Argentus ingots. His target is not a building. It is a cloud. No one in the Congress knows this mission exists. Down in the rice paddies of Laos, families will never understand why the monsoon failed that year. Everyone knows cloud seeding exists. Since the 1940s, aircraft have dropped Argentus ingots into cumulus clouds to trigger condensation. This technique has been used peacefully for decades for agriculture in dozens of nations. But what few people know is that this method was also employed for military purposes. In 1967, the American military applied this technique to a military target. The consequences were devastatingly human. Declassified CIA archives reveal information that changes our understanding of the line between civilian science and secret military operations. The operation is called Popeye. An absurd codename for a terrifying idea, turning rain into a weapon of war. The plan is simple. C-130 aircraft fly over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They drop Argentus ingots into the clouds, triggering condensation, and the rain falls. It is not normal rain. It is an artificial monsoon lasting for weeks. The ground becomes muddy. North Vietnamese trucks freeze in place. Tunnels fill with water. Lao villages are flooded. Crops are drowned. Entire families are displaced by a monsoon no one commanded, except Washington. A CIA document from 1966, titled Weather Modification, lays the groundwork for this operation 1 year before the first flight. This shows the idea did not come from a field general. It originated in Langley. It was planned, budgeted, and classified. General Westmoreland confirms to the Senate in 1971 that the operation successfully disrupted enemy supply lines. He does not mention the consequences for civilians, the flooded villages, the lost harvests, or the displaced families. The operation lasts 5 years. It runs from 1967 to 1972, involving hundreds of missions. The budget was in the Air Force accounting lines. There was no vote in Congress. There was no public debate. Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, testifies in 1972. He admits the techniques work but refuses to call them weapons. A man who built the most powerful bomb in history looks elsewhere when asked about rain. The Church Commission, in 1975, investigates CIA abuses and reveals that Operation Popeye was not an isolated test. The CIA used climate modification in several countries. 3 agencies were involved: the CIA, the U.S. Air Force, and the Department of Defense. There was no civilian institution. There was no scientific oversight. The operation remained classified as top secret for 8 years. One might assume this was Vietnam. Another era. A dirty war in a dirty age. A classified affair. However, in 1976, the United Nations signs the ENMOD Treaty. This treaty bans the use of climate modification as a weapon of war. If Popeye was an isolated incident, why draft an international treaty to forbid it? The treaty has a loophole. It forbids hostile use. It does not forbid research. It does not forbid development. It does not forbid civil applications. That gap is wide enough to hide an entire program. 20 years later, in 1996, the U.S. Air Force publishes a strategic document titled Owning the Weather in 2025. This document cites Popeye as proof of concept. It is not seen as a past error. It is viewed as a foundation. This proves that the United States did not abandon the idea of controlling the climate for military ends. What Operation Popeye reveals is not just a deception by one government during a war. It is a pattern. A methodology that repeats itself: civilian cover, military objective, absence of public debate, obedient pilots, and unknowing victims. Today, across the Middle East, entire nations accuse their neighbors of stealing their clouds. Weather seeding programs multiply. The Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran all inject particles into the same air masses. Each attempts to force rain over their territory before it arrives elsewhere. This is the same course as Popeye. But this time, it is no longer secret. It is simply uncontrolled. The CIA report from 1974, the Weather Modification Program, line 47 states, the United States is the only country known to have used weather modification as a weapon of war. Only one nation. One weapon. Signed, dated, and from the public for 30 years. If this statement is true in 1974, the question is not whether the weapon exists. The question becomes where it resides now. And who controls it? Popeye brought rain to Vietnam. But the technique traveled. It moved to Cuba, the Sahel, and Iran before the revolution. One man understood before everyone else that controlling the water means controlling nations. His name is Henry Kissinger. A document from the NSC, dated 1972, proves he had a plan. The consequences of these actions remain visible today. Understanding this history is essential to avoiding the repetition of those same errors. Climate modification for military ends raises fundamental ethical and moral questions about governmental responsibility toward their citizens and the environment. July 2018. Tehran endures a suffocating heat wave. Facing the cameras, Brigadier General Ghalam Reza Jalali, head of passive defense, delivers a statement that shakes global news agencies. Climate change in Iran is suspect. Foreign nations interfere with our skies. Israel and another regional power steal our clouds. This statement, which appears paranoid, masks a concrete scientific reality. An invisible war for blue water has begun. Everyone understands that in the Middle East, water is an extremely rare and vital resource. Regional powers have developed official programs to seed clouds. The United Arab Emirates openly announced these measures starting in 2025. What the public does not see is the territorial nature of the sky. A cloud has no passport, it drifts freely above borders. When rain is forced to fall here, it does not fall where it should. This logic, multiplied across a dozen simultaneous national programs, creates an invisible war. There are no official declarations, no borders, and no military uniforms involved. The strategic documents from the RAND Corporation and satellite registries document that this war for water control has already begun. No rules govern it. To understand this complex accusation, one must imagine the sky as a shared table. When a cloud crosses the Middle East, it knows no political boundary. This is where the analogy of the floating sponge comes into play. Injecting salt or silver iodide into a cloud does not create water. It presses the sponge above its own garden, ensuring it is completely empty when it passes over the neighbor's property. The United Arab Emirates were among the pioneers in this race. With their advanced seeding program, dozens of aircraft launch every summer to force rain onto Dubai and Abu Dhabi, securing their reserves. But for Iran, situated just behind them in the race for the wins, every drop that falls in the UAE is a drop lost for its own reservoirs and struggling agricultural lands. To frame this competition, we examine historical analysis. The RAND Corporation document from 1998, titled Environmental Security in the Middle East, already described this scenario on line 14. Water, not oil, will become the main trigger for unconventional structural tensions in the Gulf. This is not mere theory. It is an aggressive technological competition underway. Saudi Arabia launched its own massive seeding program, seeking to secure its water resources. Facing this, Iran attempts to catch up by acquiring technology and developing its own methods. The sky above the Middle East has become a vast battlefield where civilian and military pilots cross paths to hack the water cycle. Satellite imagery confirms this physical reality. On one side of the Gulf, we see lush lawns and giant fountains amidst the desert. On the other side, the brutal impact on historical Iranian lands is visible. Take the Armia Lake, which evaporates and transforms into a white salt desert. When satellite data is examined with extreme precision, the line between natural drought and artificial intervention becomes blurred. On one side of the Gulf, Dubai invests heavily in infrastructure to maintain artificial ecosystems.
On the other, the Armia Lake, once one of the world's largest saline lakes, has lost 90% of its surface area since 1970. But is this asymmetry solely the result of human technology? Scientists remain divided on the exact cause. An Iranian study from 2022 attributes 40% of this dramatic lake loss to cross-border cloud seeding. The remainder is attributed to local agricultural overexploitation and natural climate change. If this figure is accurate, the simplistic explanation that it is merely natural drought becomes untenable. Yet, the idea that this is a regional remains plausible. The true reality exists in the space between these two explanations. And that is where the next battle for water will be fought. History teaches us that controlling the environment is never neutral. It is always a tool of power. When Henry Kissinger supervised the National Security Council memos in 1972, the objective was to use the environment to dictate regime stability and influence geopolitical alliances. In the 21st century, meteorology has become the perfect shield. It is a subtle means of control. If a people lack potable water, if agriculture collapses, and riots erupt in the streets, it is politically simpler to blame a neighbor for stealing their clouds than to admit the failure of their own irrigation systems. This pattern repeats constantly across regional crises. Turkey and Iraq fight over the waters of the Tigris. Ethiopia and Egypt contend for the Nile. The same organizational structure appears in every water dossier, targeted national programs and accusations against neighbors. A declassified note from the U.S. Department of State in 2004 already warned that the perception of rain theft in the Middle East was a psychological weapon more dangerous than any actual climate manipulation. Doubt is sown, and this doubt triggers major political crises. It is not necessary to prove that an entity actually steals clouds for the crisis to erupt. It is enough that populations believe this story. This collective belief drives the true manipulation of power and fuels the escalation of territorial tensions. But as neighbors fight desperately for the last remnants of moisture, a larger shadow looms over the entire region. What happens when the superpower that invented Operation Popeye reduces its military presence in the Gulf? What the barometer's record weeks after this reduction is the burning subject of our next investigation. The year is 2026. American military bases across the Persian Gulf reduced their surveillance. Giant radars and advanced electronic systems, installed decades ago, begin to power down or relocate. This is a purely geopolitical movement. It is a massive reorganization of global interests. But on the ground, in local weather stations, a strange phenomenon occurs. Weeks after these troop movements, the barometers become erratic. Winds shift trajectory. For local populations, the explanation is not found in geography textbooks. It is beneath the radar domes of the American military. Everyone knows that the United States reduces its military presence in the Persian Gulf. The announcements are public. Bases are redeployed according to established logistics plans. What the public opinion fails to measure is the psychological imprint left by decades of massive technological presence on the region. For millions who grew up with American military installations on the horizon, these systems became a landmark. They represented visible stability and reassurance. The real question is not whether radars control the weather. Science states this plainly. The true objective is understanding why entire populations believe this and what vacuum remains when physical reality begins to distort. The archives of the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute document this phenomenon with troubling precision. Here, the analogy of the umbrella emerges. For years, the massive presence of the American fleet and its electronic warfare systems was perceived by regional consciousness as an invisible shield. This force was supposed to block missiles. It was also supposed to indirectly disrupt the atmosphere itself. The myth spreads quickly in local narratives. What if the sheer power of American technology created an artificial high-pressure zone, pushing climatic disturbances away from Iran? Line 88 of a report from the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute confirms this. The electromagnetic imprint of our advanced systems generates environmental causality theories among the adversary.
This means the American military knows its equipment fuels these beliefs. They chose not to correct this narrative. Fear crystallized into local certainty. This idea rests on a historical confusion deeply embedded in collective memory. When the HAARP project began in Alaska in 1993, official documents stated they were studying the ionosphere using high-frequency emitters. Yet, the public immediately saw a machine capable of manufacturing storms and manipulating weather systems. When the U.S. military deploys its X-band radars aboard ships in the Gulf to monitor Iranian airspace, this local rumor fuses science and fantasy. The frequencies used are similar to those of civilian weather radars. This fuels the idea that it is not a simple measurement. It is a targeted climatic weapon. For a citizen who sees an anomaly on a public radar application above a military base, this perception is not a technical error. It is tangible proof of atmospheric control exerted by military systems. The gradual withdrawal of American forces creates a military and logistical void. But nature, like politics, abhors a vacuum and uncertainty. The air masses that seem trapped or diverted for years suddenly begin to flow into the Mesopotamian corridor. They reveal a dynamic that conventional maps cannot explain. Meteorological reality is documented by undeniable satellite data. The eastern Mediterranean heats up twice the global average. Low-pressure systems that traditionally hit the Balkans now glide increasingly eastward. This is a long-term climatic drift. It has nothing to do with tactical troop movements. Yet, the temporal coincidence is disturbing. NASA satellite data shows a significant increase in precipitation across certain Gulf regions within 60 days following several U.S. base closures between 2024 and 2026. Correlation or causation? Climatologists agree, statistical correlation. But this correlation is sufficient to feed the narrative of manipulation. Furthermore, an internal Pentagon memo from 2012 already posed the question, is maintaining uncertainty about our environmental manipulation capabilities a passive force multiplier? The answer in that classified document remains open. This is not mere observation. It is a deliberate strategy that escapes public control. This phenomenon demonstrates how modern military technology has become indistinguishable from sorcery for those who bear its direct consequences. The American withdrawal is not merely a logistical or strategic maneuver. It is the end of a psychological era built upon an illusion of control. The radars that shut down release the sky from the specters of electronic warfare. They leave behind a reality far more raw and uncontrollable for local populations. This model, invisible technology perceived as a tool for atmospheric control, is not isolated. It is documented in other contexts. The shutdown of Soviet radars across Eastern Europe after 1991 generated exactly the same local theories and a profound mistrust. What the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute calls perceived environmental causality is no longer just an academic parameter. It is now integrated into geopolitical risk analyses to anticipate the psychological consequences of technological deregulation. The focus shifts away from correcting physics. The goal becomes managing the psychological effect that physics produces. This mechanism revolves around a documented secret. The internal Pentagon memo from 2012, concerning psychological warfare and environmental capabilities, stated clearly, maintaining uncertainty about our environmental manipulation capabilities is a passive force multiplier. By never fully denying their power over the climate, the United States nourished the monster that is now turning against them. This was not a communication error. It was a documented strategy. It was a deliberate management of perception designed to maximize influence without assuming direct responsibility for the resulting climatic and geopolitical consequences. As the American technological umbrella closes over the Persian Gulf, the atmosphere unleashes its force. Clouds no longer follow borders. They accumulate heavy, black, charged with an energy the region has not seen in a century. But before this climatic deluge breaks, one fundamental question remains open: can HAARP truly achieve what is alleged? Official documents answer this query. The response will reveal the full extent of this power.